She had 30 seconds, maybe less. The note was already in her hand, folded once edges, sharp 8 words that could get her killed. Across the dining room, Luca Moretti was laughing at something his fiancée had just said. Low, easy, the laugh of a man who believed he was safe. He wasn't. Mara Ellis knew exactly what was coming for him tonight. She'd heard it planned word by word 3 nights ago in the dark. And standing here now, tray in hand, apron still tied, she made the only decision that terrified her more than staying silent. She walked toward him. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches. Stay until the very end. I promise you will not see the last twist coming. The whiskey glass was cold against her palm. That was the thing Mara Ellis would remember later. Not the fear, not the noise, not the moment the doors blew open. She would remember the cold of the glass and how her hand refused to stop shaking and how she kept telling herself 4 more steps. Just 4 more steps and then it's done. Table 9 was in the far corner. Luca Moretti sat with his back to the east wall the way he always did. His fiancée, Juliet Crane, was leaning toward him, speaking softly, one hand open on the white tablecloth like an offering. She was wearing something dark and expensive. She was smiling. She looked like a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be. She was. Just not for the reason Luca thought. Mara set the whiskey down on his right side. Smooth. Practiced. 3 years of invisibility paying off in one moment. And then she did the thing she'd been building herself up to for the last 40 minutes. She slipped the folded note beneath the edge of his bread plate, and she straightened and she walked away. 6 steps. She counted them. On step 7, she exhaled for the first time since she'd left the service station. On step 9, she became absolutely bone deep, certain that she had just made either the bravest decision of her life or the last one. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked back and saw him reading it, her legs would stop working. She knew this about herself. So she walked to the service station by the kitchen door, set her tray down on the counter, and stood very still while the joust played softly overhead, and the dining room murmured around her. And somewhere behind her, a man was reading 8 words that were about to detonate his entire world. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now. You look like you've seen a ghost. Mara turned. It was Priya, fellow waitress, 2 years on the job. The kind of person who noticed everything and usually had the good sense not to say so. Tonight, apparently, was an exception. I'm fine, Mara said. You're the color of the tablecloths. I'm fine, Priya. Priya looked at her for one long second, the look of someone deciding whether to push. She decided not to. She picked up her tray and moved on, and Mara turned back to the room and finally let herself look at table 9. Luca's right hand was resting on the table. Still. Completely still. The note was gone, she couldn't see it, and his face was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Juliet was still talking, he was still looking at her. A perfect, unbroken portrait of an intimate dinner between 2 people in love. But his hand had not moved a millimeter. Mara had watched enough people at enough tables to know what controlled stillness looked like versus the real thing. Real stillness was relaxed. Real stillness breathed. What she was looking at right now was a man who had just received a grenade and was gripping it with both hands, and every single muscle in his body was concentrated on not showing it. He'd read it. She felt her stomach drop straight through the floor. What she had not let herself fully confront in the 40 minutes of building herself up to write the note and slip it across the table was the question of what happened after. She'd been so focused on the doing of it that the consequences had lived somewhere in the background, vague and unformed. Now they rushed in all at once, sharp and specific. She had just told a Mafia boss that the woman sitting across from him was planning to have him killed tonight, in this building, at this table. And she had no backup, no plan, no protection, and absolutely no idea what a man like Luca Moretti did with information like that. She was about to find out. He stood up, not fast, not in a way that drew the eye. He rose from his chair with the easy, unhurried manner of a man who has simply decided to excuse himself for a moment, the kind of movement that registered as nothing to everyone in the room. He said something brief to Juliet. She laughed softly. He touched the back of her hand with 2 fingers. Light assured a gesture so practiced it looked like love. And then he turned. and his eyes found Mara across the dining room like a compass finding north. She stopped breathing. He walked toward her at the same even pace. Not fast, not slow. A man who had spent his whole life learning that the way you moved across a room told people everything about what was in your head, and what was in your head right now needed to stay completely invisible. He stopped in front of her. Close. Closer than her customer stopped. "The note," he said. His voice was quiet, conversational, perfectly calibrated to be heard by exactly one person. "That was you." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "Yes." "You heard her. 3 nights ago." Her own voice surprised her, steadier than she felt. "The private suite at the back. The door was open. I wasn't trying to—" "What did you hear exactly?" The words were calm, but the weight behind them was not. He was watching her face with the focused attention of a man running rapid internal calculations, cross-referencing everything she said against everything he already knew. "She was with someone, a man. I didn't see him," she said. Mara stopped, swallowed. "She said Thursday, Vesper House, table 9. She knew you'd be here, and she knew exactly where you'd be sitting. She said federal agents would come through the front, Romano's people through the kitchen." She met his eyes. "She said you'd die in the confusion and both sides would blame each other." Something crossed Luca Moretti's face. It was there for less than a second, a fracture in the control deep and real, and then it was gone, sealed over, like watching a lake surface close over a stone. "Romano," he said, very quietly. "She mentioned an account, money she'd already moved. She said you didn't know about it." The fracture again, smaller this time, harder. "No," he said almost to himself, "I didn't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The jazz played, plates clinked, someone laughed at a table across the room. Juliet Crane sat at table 9 with her hands folded and her smile in place, performing patience, performing love, performing the last scene of a play she thought she had already won. "Why," Luca said. Mara blinked. "Why what?" "Why tell me?" He wasn't accusing her. He was genuinely asking in the way of a man who has learned through hard experience that kindness from a stranger is almost always a transaction. "You don't know me. You had no reason to get involved. So why?" She thought about lying. She thought about giving him the clean, simple answer because it was right, and part of her knew that was even true. But she also knew that a man who had survived long enough to sit at the top of the kind of world he inhabited would hear a partial truth as clearly as a lie. "My brother," she said, "Danny Ellis. I think he's involved in something connected to all of this. He told me that if you survived tonight, it would matter, that people would owe him something." She paused. "I think he's in trouble. I think this was the only thing I could do for him." Luca was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, not softer exactly, but different, more direct, like a door opening instead of a window. "Your brother works for Caruso." The name landed on her like a hand on her shoulder. She didn't know it, but the way he said it told her everything about what it meant. "I didn't know that. He's been passing information to multiple parties, a beat, including to me indirectly. He was trying to build a way out." He looked at her steadily. "He's been trying to get clear of Caruso for 6 months. The problem is Caruso doesn't let people get clear." "Is Danny safe?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "Tonight, yes. What happens to him after tonight?" He stopped. "Depends on how tonight goes." Before she could respond, she heard a sound from somewhere near the front entrance, low and brief, the specific mechanical sound of a door handle being tested from outside. Not the movement of a diner arriving, the movement of someone who had been waiting. Something changed in Luca's entire body. It wasn't visible to anyone who wasn't standing directly in front of him. But to Mara, who was, it was like watching a current switch on. Every part of him simultaneously became something different. "We're out of time," he said. "What do kitchen, service exit, right now?" He wasn't asking. He was also, she noticed, not panicking. And in that moment, the absence of panic in a man who absolutely knew what was about to happen was either the most reassuring thing she'd ever seen or the most terrifying. She hadn't decided which. "Can you move?" "Yes." "Then stay with me. Don't stop for anything." He held her gaze for 1 second longer. And Mara, whatever you think of who I am, what you did tonight. Something genuine moved through his eyes, real and unguarded and gone in an instant. It mattered. He turned toward the kitchen, and the front doors of Vesper House blew open. Not the polite push of arriving guests. The full, flat authority of people who had decided that waiting was over, and the voices came in with the doors hard and official and cutting through every sound in the room like something cold through something warm. Federal agents, nobody move. Hands where I can see them. Do not reach for anything, federal agents. The dining room detonated, not in the way of an explosion, in the way of a pressure system collapsing all at once. Chairs scraped, glasses tipped. Someone screamed high and short, then cut themselves off. A table went over. The music kept playing for 3 more seconds. Jazz, oblivious, eternal, and then someone killed it, and in the sudden silence, the shouting of the agents was enormous. Mara's legs were already moving. She didn't remember deciding to run. She simply found herself running, following Luca through the swing door into the kitchen, into the heat and the light, and the startled faces of the kitchen staff, who were all looking toward the dining room with the particular expression of people who work at Vesper House and have always understood that one night this night would eventually arrive. And then the service entrance at the back of the kitchen, a heavy steel door, the kind with a push bar, crashed open from the outside. 2 men came through it, big, dark clothing, moving with the controlled efficiency of people who had done this before and intended to do it again. Luca's arm came out sideways in front of Mara, stopping her, and he said something in Italian low and fast to the man on the left, a single sentence, and she watched the man's face go through something she couldn't fully read, surprise, then recalibration, then a kind of rapid internal conflict. The man on the left said something back. 3 words. Luca responded, 4 words. The man stepped aside. Later, Mara would spend a long time thinking about that moment, about what those words had been, and what it meant that 7 words in a language she didn't speak had been enough to open a door that should have been closed to them. About what kind of man could walk into a trap set by the person who shared his bed with federal agents coming through the front and hired killers coming through the back, and still have enough pieces in play that he could talk his way through a locked door. But that was later. Right now, Luca grabbed her hand, and they went through the service exit into the alley, and the cold night air hit her like a wall, and somewhere behind them, something shattered glass or a mirror, or the version of her life that had existed until about 20 minutes ago, when she'd picked up a pen and written 8 words and decided to stop being invisible. She ran. And from somewhere above them, on a building across the alley, a red dot appeared on the wall 3 feet to her left and moved and found her. Luca saw it before she did. He moved without a word. No warning, no time, just his body suddenly completely between her and the rooftop, and the crack of a shot splitting the night air was the last thing Mara Ellis heard before the world rearranged itself entirely. The shot missed. Mara knew this because she was still alive, still breathing, still pressed against the cold brick wall of the alley with Luca's weight against her, and the echo of the crack bouncing off every surface around them like something that couldn't decide where to land. Her ears were ringing. Her knees had buckled somewhere in the half-second between the red dot appearing and Luca moving, and she was only still upright because his arm had caught her on the way down without him even seeming to think about it. "Don't look up," he said directly into her ear. "Low, fast. There's a second shooter, east side. Don't give them an angle." "How do you—" "Because if I were running this, I'd have 2. He was already moving, pulling her with him, keeping her body close to the wall and his body between her and the roofline. The first shot was a miss on purpose. They're pushing us toward the street. That's why would they push us toward the street? Because something's waiting on the street. He said it the way you say a thing you already knew and were hoping you were wrong about. Keep moving." She kept moving. The alley was maybe 40 feet long, and every one of those feet felt like it existed in its own separate unit of time, stretched hyper-real, the kind of sensory overload that she'd read about but never fully believed in until right now. She could hear her own breathing. She could hear Luca's footsteps on the pavement, controlled and deliberate even now. She could hear somewhere behind them the continued shouting from inside Vesper House, and the sound of something heavy falling over, and a woman crying in a high rhythmic way that didn't sound like it was ever going to stop. She did not think about Juliet Crane sitting at table 9, when the federal agents came through the door. She did not think about the expression on Juliet's face in that moment. She filed that away for a later version of herself who might have the luxury of thinking about things that weren't immediately trying to kill her. They reached the end of the alley and Luca stopped. His hand came up flat firm, the universal gesture for "don't move," and she stopped with him, and he leaned forward just enough to see the street. Whatever he saw, it confirmed something. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Car, black, running dark, no plates, parked at the east corner. Romano's, yes. He pulled back. He was thinking she could feel it. The quality of his stillness had shifted, again become something computational rather than reactive. There's a door, 12 feet back on the right side of this alley. Metal, service entrance for the building next door. It'll be locked. Then how? I know who owns the building. He was already moving back along the wall. Stay on my left. She stayed on his left. The door was where he said it was heavy dark metal flush, with the brick the kind of door designed to be not noticed. Luca knocked on it 4 times. A specific rhythm, not frantic, not random. A pattern. Silence. Mara's pulse was so loud in her own ears, she was half convinced the people in the car at the end of the alley could hear it. 8 seconds. 10. She counted them. At 12, she was about to say something she didn't know what, but something when the door opened from the inside. The man who opened it was 60, maybe 65. Small, compact, white-haired, wearing the kind of cardigan that belonged in a kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, rather than in a back alley emergency in the middle of the night. He looked at Luca. He looked at Mara. He looked back at Luca. You said you'd never need this, the old man said. I said I hoped I'd never need it, Luca said. That's different. The old man stepped back without another word, and they went inside. His name was Enzo, and this Mara would piece together over the next few minutes was a man who had known Luca Moretti for 30 years, had done business with his father before him, and had been given a very specific instruction some years ago. If I ever knock on that door, you open it, and had apparently never questioned whether he would follow that instruction when the moment came. He simply had, because that was the kind of man Enzo was. Because that was the kind of loyalty that existed in the world Luca Moretti lived in, not the performed loyalty of people who said the right things but the bedrock kind, the kind that showed up in back alleys at midnight without asking for an explanation. Mara sat down on a wooden chair near a small table because her legs had finally registered a complaint they were no longer willing to defer. Luca stood near the door listening. She watched him process the sounds from outside the alley, the street, the distant continued noise from Vesper House, the way a person reads a page, scanning quickly, extracting what mattered. Enzo put a glass of water on the table in front of her. She drank half of it in one pull. You're bleeding, Enzo said to Luca. Luca looked down at his left arm. There was a tear in the jacket sleeve, and beneath it, dark against the fabric, not a lot but enough. The first shot, he said, as if he were reporting a minor inconvenience. Grazed. Graze, Enzo repeated with the tone of a man who has spent decades watching other men describe serious things as minor. He moved to a cabinet on the far wall and began pulling things out of it without being asked. I didn't know you were hit, Mara said. Luca glanced at her. It didn't seem like the right moment to bring it up. You were bleeding in the alley and you didn't say anything. We were also being shot at. Context. He said it without inflection, and she couldn't tell if it was dark humor or pure pragmatism, or some combination of both that she didn't have a category for yet. He sat down across from her and held his arm still while Enzo cleaned and dressed the wound with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before possibly many times and had stopped registering an opinion about it. Mara put the water glass down. She looked at Luca. Juliet was going to let them kill you. Yes. The federal agents, she fed them information for 8 months. She told them they were arresting you. She let them think that's what tonight was. I heard what you said the first time, he said quietly. I'm processing it. She stopped, pressed her hands flat on the table. I need to understand something. The man Juliet was talking to in the private suite, she called him by a name. I didn't recognize it, but I remember it. Vitelli. Something moved in Enzo's hands. Just a pause, less than a second, but real. He resumed without looking up. Luca's eyes were on Mara with an intensity that made the air between them feel slightly pressurized. Say that again. Vitelli, she said it once. She was talking about the timing about Romano's people, and she said Vitelli confirmed the east approach. Luca sat back. For the first time tonight, he looked like something had genuinely surprised him. Not rattled him, not frightened him. Surprised him, which on his face was an expression so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to identify it. That's not possible, he said, but his voice said the opposite. Who is Vitelli? Mara asked. Luca didn't answer immediately. He looked at Enzo. A long look, the kind that carried an entire conversation that she wasn't a party to. Enzo kept his eyes on his work. He finished tying off the bandage and straightened up and folded the unused gauze with the precise, unhurried movements of a man who had decided to be very busy with something else right now. Vitelli, Luca said finally, is my head of security. The sentence landed in the room and just sat there. Mara stared at him. He's been with me for 11 years, Luca said. Each word was separate, deliberate, like he was arranging them into the shape of something he hadn't fully accepted yet. He knows every safe house, every protocol, every exit route. A pause. He's the one who planned tonight's security detail. Which means, Mara said slowly, he knew exactly which detail to leave out. Yes. Luca's voice was completely flat, the flatness of something very large and very cold. He did. Another sound from outside, closer now, a car moving slowly down the street that bordered the alley and then stopping. Luca's head tilted. That same fractional tilt she'd noticed in the restaurant, the one that meant he was listening to something others couldn't hear. They're repositioning, he said quietly. They know we're in this block. They're narrowing it. How long do we have? Mara asked. Not long. He looked at Enzo, the lower level. Enzo nodded once and moved toward the back of the room. He lifted a section of flooring, a trap door hinged perfectly fitted, the kind of thing that was invisible unless you knew it was there, and below it was a staircase going down. Mara looked at it. She looked at Luca. She made a decision in about 1 second. She went down the stairs. Below was a narrow passage, concrete walls, low ceiling, a string of utility lights that Enzo clicked on from a switch at the top before descending behind them and pulling the trap door closed above him. The air was cool and still and tasted like deep foundations in Old City. The passage ran forward away from the building in a direction that Mara estimated was roughly parallel to the street. Where does this go? She asked. 2 buildings north, Luca said behind her. There's a garage, 2 cars, keys are in both. You have this set up everywhere. Not everywhere. A beat. Enough places. They walked in single file, Mara first, Luca behind her, Enzo last. The lights were sparse and between them the dark was absolute, and Mara focused on the sound of her own footsteps and the weight of everything she'd learned in the last 30 minutes arranging itself inside her into something she could actually hold without dropping. Juliet Crane had spent 8 months building a trap. She had given federal agents real information, real enough to be credible, real enough to earn their trust, while simultaneously coordinating with the Romano's people to ensure that in the chaos of the raid, Luca wouldn't survive to be arrested. He would simply die. And Vitelli, the man paid to protect him, had been the architect of his exposure. That was the picture. And underneath it somewhere she hadn't fully excavated yet was her brother. Danny, who worked for someone named Caruso, who had been passing information to multiple parties, who had been trying to get out for 6 months. Danny, who had called her from borrowed phones in the dark and said, if Moretti survives, it changes things. Luca, she said. She kept walking, eyes forward, his voice low. My brother. If Vitelli is the leak, if Romano had access to Vitelli, would they have access to what Danny was passing, to what he knew? A pause in his footsteps. Then they resumed. Possibly. Meaning they might know who he is. Meaning they might know exactly who he is, what he knows, and what he's been trying to do. The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with the temperature of the passage. Then he's not safe tonight. You said tonight he was safe, but that was before Vitelli. I know. Then we need to. I know, Mara. Not harsh, not dismissive. The voice of someone who was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation and was carrying more weight in that statement than the words themselves expressed. I'm working on it. Working on it how you said it yourself. Vitelli knows every safe house, every protocol. If he's told Romano's people what he knows, then we don't use the safe houses. He said it simply, and we work from what I haven't told Vitelli. Is there anything you haven't told him? One place, a brief silence. My brother's house. She almost stopped walking. You have a brother. Marco. Younger. He's been out of the business for 8 years. Got married, moved across town, runs a restaurant. Nothing connected to me officially. I kept it that way. Another pause. Vitelli doesn't know about Marco. And you're sure? I'm sure because if Vitelli knew about Marco, Marco wouldn't still have a restaurant to run. The certainty in his voice was absolute and bleak, and she understood in a way she couldn't quite put into words that it wasn't arrogance. It was just a man who had spent enough time in a world with very clear consequences to know exactly what certain knowledge cost. They reached the end of the passage. A metal ladder bolted to the wall going up. Above it, another trapdoor. Luca went up first this time, pushed it open, looked, then reached down and helped her up. The garage was dark and smelled of motor oil and old concrete. 2 cars as promised. He went to the closer one, dark, unremarkable, the automotive equivalent of a plain white envelope. He opened the driver's door, then stopped. There's something you need to know, he said. He wasn't looking at her. His hand was on the door frame, and he was speaking at a slightly downward angle, like he was talking to the wire as much as to her. I'm going to make some calls in the next few minutes. Things are going to move fast. I'm going to try to get your brother to a location that's clean, that Vitelli doesn't know about, and I'm going to try to do it before Romano figures out we're not contained in that block. He paused. But I need to know something first. What Danny told you exactly. The part about being on the right side, about people owing him something, who specifically told him that, because Danny's been talking to a lot of people, and right now I need to know which ones he trusts, which ones he's been working with, and which ones are the ones that got him into this in the first place. Mara thought about it. He said these people. He said if Moretti survives, there are people who would call that a debt, a real one. He said people, not a person. People, plural. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then did he use the word debt or did he use the word favor? Debt. He was specific about it. He said the kind that gets paid. Something shifted in Luca's expression. The distinction matters, he said. A favor is informal. A debt is a contract. If Danny used that word, he wasn't freelancing. Someone gave him that word. Someone who knew the value of it. He looked at her directly. Someone inside my organization. She met his eyes. Someone who isn't Vitelli. Someone who was already planning a counter move before tonight. He let the implication settle. Which means someone knew this was coming before I did. Before you warned me, they were already setting up the other side of the board. Mara felt something cold and sharp clarify inside her. Danny isn't just trying to get out, she said slowly. He's been working with someone in your organization who's been building a play against Romano. And they used him as a messenger, someone low enough that Romano wouldn't notice him, but connected enough to carry the right information. Yes, Luca said, that's what it sounds like. And you don't know who that is? Not yet. He got in the car. She walked to the passenger side and got in. Enzo had already faded back into the passage. She hadn't seen him go, which she suspected was entirely intentional. But I have a strong suspicion, Luca said, starting the engine, that by the end of tonight, that person is going to make themselves known. How do you know? Because they went to all this trouble. He pulled out of the garage, slow and dark, into the side street. People who go to this much trouble aren't quiet about it afterward. They want the result. They want the credit. Whatever they've been building tonight is the night it either works or it doesn't. He glanced at her. And they sent you, which means they were confident. They didn't send me, Mara said sharply. I made my own choice. I know. He said it without concession or apology. But the information you had it because you were working at Vesper House. You were working at Vesper House because you needed the income. You needed the income because your brother's situation has been draining you financially for months. He kept his eyes on the road. Did you find the job through Danny? The silence that followed had a specific weight to it. Mara sat with it. She turned the question over. She looked at it from different angles. And then she thought about the call, the one where she'd been frustrated between jobs, and Danny had mentioned he had heard of an opening at Vesper House that it was good money that he knew someone who could put in a word. She had thought at the time that it was Danny trying to help, for once, trying to give instead of take. She had been grateful. Yes, she said quietly. Luca said nothing. He didn't need to. She had not walked into Vesper House 3 years ago. She had been placed there. By Danny. By whoever Danny was working with. She had been a piece on a board, positioned and patient for 3 years, waiting for a night that would require someone invisible and trusted and inside the room to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. The anger came fast and clean, and she let it. He used me, she said. He protected you, Luca said. There's a difference. Whatever role you were placed in, you were placed somewhere safe, away from the exposure, away from the risk. You were the insurance policy, not the operation. He paused. That's the move of someone who cares about you. It's also the move of someone who ran out of better options. She wanted to argue with that. She turned it over and couldn't. She sat with the anger and let it exist alongside everything else. The fear, the adrenaline, the impossible. Sharp clarity of a night that had already changed everything and was apparently not finished. Where are we going? She asked. Marco's, he said. We need a phone that Vitelli can't trace in a room where I can think. He turned onto a broader street, dark and mostly empty. And then we're going to figure out who inside my organization was 2 moves ahead of all of this. Mara looked at the road ahead of them. The city moved past in its nighttime rhythm, streetlights, closed storefronts, the occasional late car completely indifferent to the fact that everything had come apart and was somehow improbably still in motion. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She'd forgotten she had it. She pulled it out. Unknown number, 8 words. Different words this time, but she recognized the cadence immediately, the same sharp specificity of someone used to saying exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. He knows you're in the car. Get out now. Mara stared at the screen. The car was moving at 30 miles an hour. Her hand was shaking again. Luca, she said. Her voice was very controlled. She was proud of that. Someone just texted me. He glanced at her. At the phone, back at the road. What does it say? She read it aloud. The car did not slow down. Luca's hands on the wheel did not change position. His face did not move. But in the 4 seconds of silence that followed, she felt the air in the car change in a way that made every instinct she'd developed over the last hour of surviving impossible things go very, very quiet and very, very alert. Who has your number? He asked. Almost no one. Danny. Yes. Another silence. Longer this time. They stopped at a light red, the only car at the intersection, and Luca looked at the text on her phone for a long moment without reaching for it. He's already watching, Luca said. Not to her, to himself, like confirming something. He's watching and he's warning you away from me. He looked up at the red light, which means he doesn't trust where I'm going. Or, Mara said, he doesn't trust who's already there. The light turned green for 4 seconds before someone behind them honked. Luca drove through the intersection, but something had changed in the quality of his silence. It was no longer the silence of a man processing. It was the silence of a man who had just revised something fundamental and was deciding what to do about the revision. Call Danny back, he said. It's an unknown number. I can't call back an unknown number. Text it. 3 words. Where are you? Nothing else. Mara typed it, sent it, held the phone in her lap and watched the screen. The little delivered indicator appeared immediately. Then nothing. 10 seconds. 20. The kind of 20 seconds that expands to fill all available space. Then don't go to Marco's. Luca read it over her shoulder at a red light. His jaw tightened. He knows about Marco. You said Vitelli didn't know. Vitelli doesn't. He said it with a certainty that had developed a hairline crack in it. Which means Danny's source isn't Vitelli. He accelerated through the light. Danny's source knows things Vitelli doesn't know. Things almost nobody knows. How many people know about Marco? 4, Luca said, including Marco himself. She didn't ask him to name the other 3. The way he said it told her he was already running through them in his head with the specific focus of a man sorting through everything he thought was solid and finding fault lines he hadn't known were there. She watched his profile in the passing streetlights, controlled, concentrated a face that was doing significant internal work while showing almost nothing on the surface. Her phone buzzed again. Gas station. Renner and Ninth. 10 minutes. Come alone. She read it twice. Then she looked at Luca. He had already read it. No, he said. He said, come alone. I heard what he said. He's my brother. He's also someone who has been feeding information to multiple parties for 6 months and who, until approximately 40 minutes ago, was letting you work in a restaurant owned by a criminal organization without telling you why. He kept his eyes on the road. Coming alone is not something you're doing. You don't get to make that call. I'm making it anyway. She opened her mouth to push back, and he cut her off, not with volume. He hadn't raised his voice once tonight, but with directness. Mara, whoever's running Danny, whatever operation he's been part of, they placed you inside Vesper House. They watched you work there for 3 years. They knew exactly when to activate you, which was tonight, which means they've been tracking the timeline of this thing very closely. He glanced at her. They sent you a text from an unknown number telling you to get out of my car. Now they want you to come to a gas station alone. Does that feel like your brother being careful? Or does that feel like someone using your brother to move you somewhere without me? She sat with it. She hated how much sense it made. She hated that her instinct to defend Danny, immediate reflexive 28 years of muscle memory, kept crashing into the facts of the last hour, like something running into a wall it couldn't see. I'm not leaving him out there, she said. I know. A pause. Something in his voice shifted, lost a fraction of its operational edge. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to not walk into a room I can't see first. He looked at her again briefly. That's all. She texted back, on my way. Then she turned the phone over in her lap and said nothing else, and Luca drove, and outside the windows, the city moved past in its nighttime version of itself, quieter, darker, more honest, somehow. All the daytime performance stripped away. The gas station at Renner and Ninth was a 24-hour place, fluorescent, and exposed the kind of location that was either very smart or very stupid for a meeting. No shadows, nowhere to hide, everything visible from every direction. She thought about that, thought about whether Danny had chosen it or whether someone had chosen it for him. Luca parked on the street half a block north behind a panel van that gave them a sight line to the lot without being immediately visible from it. He killed the engine. I don't see him, Mara said. He's there. Luca was looking at something she wasn't. Gray jacket, near the air pump on the east side. He's been there for a while. He's not moving like someone who just arrived. She looked, and then she saw him, her brother. Thinner than the last time, which she hadn't thought was possible, with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders carrying the particular set of a person who has been braced for something bad for a long time and has almost but not quite stopped believing it might not come. Something in her chest performed a complicated maneuver. She reached for the door handle. Wait, Luca said. I'm not waiting. 30 seconds, just look. Tell me if anything in that lot doesn't fit. She made herself do it. Made herself look at the lot the way Luca looked at rooms, not at the center, at the edges. The attendant inside the booth, visible through glass, watching something on his phone. A woman at the pump nearest the street, filling a sedan, not looking up. A car at the far end of the lot, engine off, no visible occupant. Far corner, she said. Car with nobody in it. I see it. It's been there since before we pulled up. Engine was running when we arrived. I could see the exhaust. It stopped about 20 seconds ago. He was quiet for a moment. Someone cut the engine when we stopped, which means someone in that car was watching for us. Romano. Or the other side. He opened his door. I'm coming with you. You just said, I said you weren't going alone. I didn't say I was staying in the car. He was already out. She followed. They crossed the street side by side. Danny saw her when they were still 20 feet away. She watched the sequence cross his face, relief, then immediate complication when he registered who was walking next to her, then something that wasn't quite fear but lived in the same neighborhood. Mara. He came toward her, reached for her arm. She let him take it. She looked at his face up close and felt the complicated love she'd always felt for her brother, the specific mix of exasperation and tenderness that came from watching someone you cared about make consistently terrible decisions and finding that it didn't make you love them less, only more exhausted. Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Danny, you shouldn't be here. He glanced at Luca, nervous and fast. Either of you. The gas station is. I thought it was clean, but there's a car. We saw it, Luca said. East corner. Who is it? Danny's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Mara. He already knows most of it, she said. Tell him. I can't. Daniel. She used his full name the way she had when they were kids, and she'd run out of patience, and it landed on him with the same weight it always had. Tell him. Right now. We don't have time. Danny exhaled. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the ground, and when he raised his head, there was something different in his face, something that had stopped performing. The car is Reyes's people, he said. Elena Reyes. She's the one who's been running me. Luca went completely still. Elena Reyes. You know her, Mara asked. I know of her. He said it carefully, the kind of careful that meant he was deciding how much to say. She runs a private intelligence operation. Freelance. She's worked for law enforcement for private clients for people like me. The kind of work that doesn't have a job title you put on a business card. A pause. She's also someone who has been trying to put a case together against Romano for the better part of 3 years. She recruited me 14 months ago, Danny said. He was speaking faster now, the way people speak when they've been holding something in too long and the release valve has finally opened. I owed money to Caruso's people, real money, the kind where they stop sending letters and start sending other things, and she came to me with an offer. Work with her past information, help her build a picture of how Romano's operation was connected to Caruso's, and the debt would disappear. Protection for me. A way out. And Mara? Luca asked. Quiet. Precise. Danny's eyes went to his sister. I put her in Vesper House because it was the safest place I could get her. I needed someone on the inside who had no idea they were on the inside. If Mara knew she'd have been a liability, she'd have been nervous, she'd have behaved differently, someone would have noticed. He looked at her with something raw and unguarded. And if anything went wrong, I needed her clean. Completely clean, no knowledge, no exposure, no risk. You needed her to be usable without being used up, Luca said. That's not, Danny started. It's accurate. I'm not judging it. It's what I would have done. He looked at Danny steadily. Tonight, Vesper House. You knew it was coming. Reyes knew. She told me 2 days ago. Danny shoved a hand through his hair. She said Juliet Crane had pushed up the timeline. Romano moved the date forward by a week and Juliet agreed. There wasn't enough time to get word to you through the normal. He stopped, caught himself. Through the routes Reyes usually uses, so she told me to activate Mara. Activate, Mara repeated. The word landed badly. I told her to warn you, Danny said to her directly, the operation falling away from his voice and leaving just the brother underneath it. I told Reyes that Mara was the one who'd decide, that she'd do it or she wouldn't, but she was going to know the whole truth first and make her own choice. Reyes wanted to feed you a simpler story. I said no. Something shifted in Mara's chest, small but real, a single degree of recalibration. She sent me the text just now, the one telling me to get out of the car. She was watching. She got nervous when you stayed in with him. He glanced at Luca. She doesn't fully trust. A sound from the corner of the lot, the car that had been sitting dark and still. The driver's door opened. Elena Reyes was not what Mara had constructed in her imagination. She was small, 5'2", maybe less, and somewhere in her mid-50s with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of face that had been handsome once and had since traded in handsome for something more durable. She walked across the lot with the measured pace of someone who had already identified every exit and decided she didn't need any of them. She was wearing a dark coat and her hands were visible, which Mara suspected was intentional. She stopped 8 feet away. She looked at Luca for a long moment. Then she looked at Mara, then back at Luca. You're alive, she said to him. It was not warm, it was the observation of someone checking a variable. Reliably, he said, the federal team has Juliet Crane in custody. Romano's men got out through the kitchen before the agents could contain them, 3 of them. They'll be in a safe house within the hour. She spoke in brief, clean sentences, information delivered the way you delivered a weather report. Vitelli is in the wind. He made the call to Romano's people about the east approach, which your people have, on recording which is currently in the hands of someone I trust. Which someone who isn't you. She held his gaze. Yet, you've been building this for 3 years, Luca said. 2 years, 11 months. Against Romano. Romano is the architecture. You're a piece of the architecture. She said it without hostility as a simple structural fact. Romano's operation runs through 6 legitimate businesses, 4 of which have laundering exposure that could be prosecuted federally within the next 6 months if someone handed the right documentation to the right prosecutor. She paused. I have that documentation. And you want something for it, Luca said. I want Romano contained permanently. Not arrested. Arrested means lawyers and delays and witnesses who develop sudden memory problems. Contained. She held his gaze. The kind of contained that someone in your position could arrange without a courtroom. The air between them was dense with something Mara couldn't fully name, the specific weight of 2 people who operated by entirely different rules, discovering that they needed the same outcome, and were going to have to negotiate around the fact that they didn't fully trust each other to get there. Vitelli, Luca said, you said your people have a recording. I said someone I trust has a recording. Different thing. Where's Vitelli now? That depends on the next few minutes. She looked at him steadily. He's running. He doesn't know we have the recording yet. He thinks he's clean. He's heading to a fallback location, Romano's people, where he'll report that the operation partially succeeded, that you survived, but that you're isolated, cut off from your resources with no communication structure you can trust. She paused. He's going to suggest that Romano move on what's left of your operation tonight while you're still disorganized. How long before he gets there? He's 40 minutes out. She glanced at her watch. 37 now. Luca turned to Mara, and there it was again, that look, the one that cut through everything performative and landed somewhere direct and specific. He wasn't asking permission. He was checking something. Checking that she was still with him. That the ground between them, which had been built in approximately 90 minutes of crisis, and was therefore either the most solid or the most precarious ground imaginable, was still there. It was. She didn't know how to explain that to herself, so she didn't try. What do you need? She asked. I need to make a call. He looked at Reyes. I need 5 minutes in a line that Vitelli doesn't have access to. My phone, Reyes said. She held it out, not handing it over, extending it while keeping her fingers on the edge, a gesture that said, I'm trusting you with this specific thing, and I'm watching what you do with it. He took it. He walked 6 steps away, which was enough distance to have a private conversation, but not enough to be out of their sightline, and he dialed it from memory. He spoke quietly fast in Italian and then in English, and Mara caught fragments, a name she didn't recognize. A street addressed the word now 3 times in the space of 30 seconds. Then he hung up and walked back. He handed the phone to Reyes. 2 of my people are going to intercept Vitelli before he reaches Romano. Clean. No exposure to you. He held her gaze. In exchange for the Vitelli recording, I want the Romano documentation. That's not a balanced trade. The recording protects me. The documentation ends Romano. One of those things is worth considerably more than the other, and we both know which one. He didn't move. You've been building this for 3 years. You can't use the documentation yourself. If you could, you'd have moved already. You need someone who can. Someone with the reach to make it land without it getting buried. A pause. That's me. Reyes was quiet. It was a thinking quiet, not a resistant one, the quiet of someone running rapid calculations and not wanting to show which way they were landing. It was Danny who spoke first. Reyes, he said it simply. He's right. She looked at Danny. Something moved across her face, not fondness exactly, but the specific regard of someone who has worked alongside another person through something dangerous and arrived at a respect that wasn't there at the start. You trust him? She asked. Not rhetorical, a real question. I trust what he did tonight. I trust what Mara did tonight. He looked at his sister. I trust that. Reyes looked at Mara last. You're not in this business, she said. You came in tonight on instinct and affection, and you managed somehow not to get killed. That's a combination that doesn't usually survive contact with this world. A pause. But you're standing here. So. She reached into her coat and produced a flat drive, small, dark, completely unremarkable looking, and held it out to Luca. The Romano documentation, all of it, organized by category with source verification on every item. She kept her fingers on it for one more second. If this disappears into a drawer somewhere, I will make what I know about your operation significantly more public than you would like. Understood, Luca said. He took the drive. And in that moment, the moment of the exchange, the drive passing from her hand to his Mara's phone buzzed one more time. She looked at the screen, unknown number again. But the text wasn't 8 words this time. It was 4. Juliet made a call. She held the phone out so Luca could read it. He read it. He said nothing for 2 full seconds. Then he looked at Reyes. Juliet is in federal custody. Yes. You said someone you trust has the Vitelli recording. Yes. And that person, are they in contact with the federal team holding Juliet? Reyes's expression shifted. Fractional, but real. Why? Because someone just told Mara that Juliet made a call from custody. He held Reyes's gaze, which means either someone on the federal team allowed her to make a call she shouldn't have been allowed to make, or the federal team isn't as contained as you think it is. He paused. Or the person you trust isn't as trustworthy as you think. The silence that came after that was a different quality of silence than any of the previous ones tonight. It had a specific texture, the texture of a plan that has been running well, discovering a variable it didn't account for, and everyone present understanding simultaneously that the variable was important and that none of them knew yet how important. Reyes took her phone back and dialed. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. She dialed again, voicemail again. Her face did not change, but her jaw set in a way that told Mara everything. Who did you call? Luca asked. My contact on the federal team. She tried a third number, picked up on the second ring. Mara could hear a voice on the other end, but not the words. Reyes listened for 10 seconds. When, she asked? Then how many? Then she hung up. She looked at Luca. Juliet was given a phone to make a call in exchange for information. The agent who authorized it was acting on instruction from his supervisor. She stopped. His supervisor is a man named Greer. Marcus Greer. He's been the federal point of contact on the Romano investigation for 2 years. And Luca said, quiet. And Greer's supervisor flagged his finances 3 months ago, an account in a different name, deposits that don't correspond to a federal salary. She paused. Nobody acted on the flag because Greer has a clean record and the investigation needed him. Another pause. Juliet made her call 12 minutes ago. We don't know who she called. Danny said it before Mara could. He said it in the flat, certain voice of someone who has been moving pieces around a board long enough to know what the next move is before it happens. She called Romano, he said. She told him Vitelli's been intercepted, which means Romano knows your people are coming. He looked at Luca. Your 2 people, they're walking into something. Luca already had Reyes' phone back in his hand. He dialed. It rang and rang and rang. Nobody answered. He lowered the phone. He stood in the middle of a gas station lot at 1 a.m. with a flat drive in his pocket and a gunshot graze on his arm, and the information that 2 of his people were probably already in serious trouble, and his face showed none of it except in his eyes where something very cold and very controlled had settled in like a long winter, making itself at home. We need to move, he said, all of us, right now. Where? Reyes asked. Not Marco's. He was already walking toward the car. There's a location. Nobody alive knows about it except me. He paused without turning around. And that's the point. Mara walked after him. Danny fell into step beside her, close the way he used to walk when they were kids, and he was scared of something and didn't want to admit it. She reached out and grabbed his hand without looking at him. He grabbed back, hard. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for Vesper House, for all of it. I should have told you. Yes, she said, you should have. I was trying to protect, I know. She kept walking. We'll fight about it later. Okay. I mean it, Danny. I have a lot to say to you and none of it is nice. I know. Good. Reyes was walking on her other side, silent, her coat pulled close. She was thinking Mara could feel it radiating off her, the dense, concentrated thought of someone rerunning every assumption of the last 3 years through a new filter and checking what survived. She'd built something careful and long, and it had been penetrated somewhere at some point, and now she was doing the work of finding the hole. They reached the car. Luca opened the doors. Everyone got in. He started the engine. He looked in the rearview mirror once, not at the road behind them at Mara, and something passed between them in that look that she couldn't have put into words, but didn't need to. It was the look of two people who have been through enough in a single night to have earned a kind of shorthand that normally takes years. The location, Reyes said from the back seat. How far? 20 minutes. He pulled into the street, assuming nothing else goes wrong in the next 20 minutes. Mara almost said something about the odds of that. She decided against it. Some observations served no purpose. They drove. The city thinned around them. The buildings changed character, industrial, older, the kind of blocks that existed in the background of the city's story rather than the center. Danny sat beside her and said nothing, and she could feel the relief coming off him in the particular wave of someone who has been afraid for a very long time and has finally tentatively allowed themselves to believe that the worst might not be inevitable. She didn't share the feeling. Not yet. Because there was still the question of who Juliet had called, the question of whether Luca's two people were safe, the question of what Romano was going to do now that his timetable had been disrupted and his inside man was compromised, and someone was carrying documentation of his entire operation on a drive small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. And underneath all of that, the question she hadn't asked yet, the one that had been sitting at the edge of her mind since Danny said Reyes had been running him for 14 months. The one that mattered more than she wanted to admit. Why tonight Reyes had known about Juliet's timeline for 2 days. She'd had 14 months to build the operation, 3 years to build the larger picture. Why activate Mara now specifically? Why not an earlier warning, a different method, a cleaner approach that didn't involve putting a waitress in the middle of a firefight? Unless tonight wasn't just about saving Luca. Unless tonight was about something else that required Luca to survive specifically this way. Specifically off balance, specifically indebted, specifically holding the Romano documentation while standing next to Elena Reyes. She turned and looked at Reyes in the back seat. Reyes was already looking at her, and in the half second of eye contact between them, Mara Ellis, who had spent 3 years learning to read a room full of dangerous people and was apparently better at it than she'd known, saw something in Elena Reyes' expression that nobody else in the car was positioned to see. Not guilt, not apology, something more complicated and more deliberate than either. Calculation. She was still being moved. The board was still in play, and Elena Reyes, who had been running this operation for nearly 3 years, was not done with her yet. Mara didn't say anything. Not yet. She turned back to face the front and let the observations settle into the part of her brain that had apparently been running a parallel operation all night. The part that noticed things, filed them, waited for the pattern to declare itself. She had learned that skill at Vesper House. 3 years of watching people who thought no one was watching them. 3 years of reading the gap between what people said and what their hands did while they were saying it. Elena Reyes' hands right now were folded in her lap. Still, patient. The hands of a woman who was exactly where she planned to be. Mara filed that and said nothing. The drive took 19 minutes. Luca navigated without GPS. He knew where he was going. The way people know the route to a place they've returned to privately alone for a long time. He said almost nothing. Danny sat beside Mara with his shoulder against hers and his breathing slowly evening out the body chemistry of fear, metabolizing into something closer to exhaustion. Reyes sat in the back and watched the city pass with the neutral attention of a person cataloging data. When Luca stopped the car, they were in a part of the city that had been industrial once and was in the process of forgetting it. Buildings that had housed machinery, now housing other things, the loud commercial identity, stripped away to something quieter and harder to read. He got out without explaining. They followed. The building he led them to was unremarkable from the outside. The door required a key and a code. Inside a staircase. Second floor, a room that was sparse in the specific way of a place used infrequently, but maintained carefully clean, functional. Nothing left out that didn't need to be there. A table, chairs, a landline phone on the counter that looked 20 years old and was almost certainly the point. Luca crossed to the landline immediately. Dialed. It rang twice. A voice answered male low, and Luca said 6 words in Italian and then listened for a long time without speaking. His back was to the room. Mara watched the line of his shoulders for information, the way she'd learned to watch everything looking for the shift, the fraction of tension, the thing the body said when the voice wasn't saying anything. His left shoulder dropped a centimeter. Just one. Just the left. He hung up and turned around. "They got out," he said. "My two people. They were approaching the intercept location when a Danny's warning came through to me. I reached them in time." He said it with the flatness of someone reporting a thing they had not been certain they'd be able to report. Vitelli was not at the location. Romano pulled him before they arrived. "Romano already knew," Reyes said. "Romano already knew." He confirmed it without looking at her, which means Juliet's call was faster than we estimated, or the information moved through a different channel, or he stopped. "Or someone else told him," Danny said from the corner where he'd sat down in a chair and was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the posture of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and is just now noticing how tired his arms are. Someone told Romano before Juliet made the call. The room went quiet, not the easy quiet of people with nothing to say, the specific quiet of a group of people all arriving at the same uncomfortable place from different directions. "Your contact," Luca said to Reyes, "the one on the federal team." "Not Greer. Your actual contact, the one you called from the lot." Reyes looked at him. "What about him?" He answered on the second ring. "You asked him when and how many. He told you Greer authorized the call." A pause. "How did he know about Greer's account, the financial flag?" "I told him 3 weeks ago I needed someone inside who understood the full picture of the exposure." "So he knew Greer was compromised?" "Yes. And he continued to work alongside Greer for 3 weeks. Luca held her gaze, without acting on it. Reyes said nothing, but something changed in her face, the expression of someone holding a structure steady that has developed a crack they can't ignore. "What's his name?" Luca asked. "That's not information I'm going to—" "His name, Reyes." "Cole," she said. Flat, tight, a word that cost something. "Nathan Cole. He's been with the federal team for 4 years. He came to me 18 months ago with the Romano financial data. He initiated contact." Luca looked at her for a long moment. "He came to you?" "Yes." "He brought you the financial data that started the Romano case?" "Yes." "And then 18 months later, he's still in place, still working alongside a compromised superior in possession of full knowledge of your operation, your sources, and your timeline." He paused. "Reyes, who built this case?" She went still in a way that was different from her usual stillness. This was the stillness of something structural, failing not dramatically, not with noise, but with the specific internal collapse of a load-bearing element, discovering it was never load-bearing at all. "He built it," she said, and her voice for the first time tonight had something fragile at the edges. "Cole brought me the architecture, the financial documentation, the connection between Romano and Caruso. All of it." She stopped. "I verified it independently." "Did you, Bob? Every piece?" "Real documentation can be a frame as easily as it can be a case." Luca wasn't pushing her. He was laying something out with a kind of precision that was almost gentle. 18 months ago, Cole brings you a package. You spend the next 18 months building a case around it. The case is real, the documentation is real, the connections are real, but the case was designed by whoever gave Cole the package. And Cole worked for them long enough to give it to you, watch you build it, and keep his hand on the wheel. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Tonight was designed to end with Romano contained, but it was also designed to end with you holding me responsible for containing him, with me holding your documentation as a liability, with the two of us in a room together at a location only I know about. He looked at Reyes directly. "Who benefits from that picture?" Mara felt the answer arrive before anyone said it. It came from the direction of everything she'd been turning over since the gas station. The calculations she'd seen in Reyes's eyes, the question of why tonight the specific architecture of an operation that had produced far too many convenient outcomes for any of them to be accidental. It was Danny who said it, quietly, with the voice of a man who has been close enough to the machinery to feel its heat without ever seeing its face. "Romano benefits," he said. "If Luca and Reyes are locked together, each holding something the other needs, each suspicious of the other, neither able to move cleanly, Romano has time. to reorganize, to relocate, to rebuild. He looked at Luca. The whole operation tonight wasn't about killing you. Killing you is messy. It makes you a martyr inside your own organization, and it triggers responses you can't control. He paused. It was about neutralizing you. Putting you in a box with someone you don't fully trust in a room you thought was secret. Holding documentation that may or may not be everything it appears to be. The silence that followed had a density to it. Mara counted 5 seconds in her head. On the 5th second, she said, "The documentation." She looked at Luca. "The drive Reyes gave you. Have you looked at it?" "Not yet." "You need to look at it now." He looked at Reyes. Something passed between them, the specific negotiation of two people deciding simultaneously whether to trust each other with something neither of them wanted to be wrong about. Reyes nodded once. Luca crossed to the counter, found a laptop in a drawer, old offline, the kind you kept specifically for things you didn't want near a network, and opened it. He put the drive in. He looked at the contents for 90 seconds without speaking. "It's real," he said, "all of it. The financial data is genuine. I can verify the account structures, the transaction patterns." He kept reading. "The Romano-Caruso connection is documented correctly. The laundering exposure is exactly what it appears to be." He looked up. "This is not a frame." "Then what is it?" Danny asked. "It's leverage," Mara said. Everyone looked at her. She wasn't sure when she'd become the person in the room who said the thing everyone else was still approaching, but here she was. It's real leverage being used to put two people who could otherwise act independently into a room together where neither of them can move without the other one knowing. She looked at Reyes. "Cole didn't corrupt your operation. He directed it. He made sure the outcome was exactly this: you and Luca together, immobilized by mutual exposure with Romano's documentation locked between you." She paused. "And somewhere right now, Cole is either reporting to Romano that it worked, or he's waiting to see what we do next." Reyes stood up. It was a precise, controlled movement, but it had an energy underneath it that Mara recognized as something Reyes didn't often let surface. She crossed to the window, didn't look out, just stood near it, and when she turned back, her face had undergone a reorganization. The analytical remove was still there, but something else had come up through it. Something personal. 18 months, she said. "I have been running this for 18 months, and I have been running it for him." Her voice was entirely level, but the level was load-bearing. "Every source I protected, every piece of documentation I verified, every conversation I had with Danny, with my contacts with you." She looked at Luca. "Has been information flowing to Nathan Cole and through Cole to wherever Cole's loyalty actually lives." She stopped. "I don't lose things I've been building for 18 months. "You haven't lost it yet," Luca said. "Cole knows this location. He knows I have a location. He doesn't know where it is. He has your communication patterns. He has Vitelli's communication patterns. What Vitelli knew." Luca moved to the table and sat, not in defeat, in the way of someone choosing to think rather than react. "Cole's picture of my operation runs through Vitelli. Everything Vitelli knew, Cole knows. Everything Vitelli didn't know." He looked at Mara. "Cole doesn't know." "What didn't Vitelli know?" Mara asked. "You," Luca said. "Vitelli had no idea you existed. I didn't know you existed until approximately 2 hours ago." He looked at the laptop screen, then at her. "Cole built his picture of tonight around Vitelli's intelligence. He knew the safe houses Vitelli knew. He knew the protocols Vitelli knew. He knew I'd come to Marco's, which is why the text warning came when it did. He needed you out of the car before we got there, because if we got to Marco's and I made calls from there, I'd have been operating from within a location Cole had mapped." His eyes moved to Reyes. He didn't plan for Mara to stay in the car. He didn't plan for the buy station meeting to put all 4 of us together. He planned for Mara to be extracted safely, gently kept out of the picture so she stayed clean and usable for whatever came next. "He's still planning to use me," Mara said. "Yes, but he doesn't know you've seen it." Luca held her gaze. "That's the only advantage we have right now. Everything else Cole can predict. You, he can't." Her phone buzzed. Everyone in the room heard it. The sound had a specific quality at this point in the night, not the ordinary quality of a notification, but the quality of an event. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Again. But this time it wasn't 8 words or 4 words. It was a photograph. She almost dropped the phone. In the photograph, grainy low-light, taken at distance but clear enough, was a man she didn't know sitting across a table from a man she did. The man she knew was Marcus Greer, the compromised federal agent Reyes had named at the gas station. The man she didn't know was lean mid-40s with a precise kind of face that belonged to someone who had been carefully unremarkable for a long time by choice. And next to the second man half in frame, a hand on the table, a woman's hand with a ring that Mara recognized. She had poured wine near that hand 60 times. She had watched it rest on Luca's hand at table 9, performing affection for 3 years' worth of Thursday dinners. Juliet Crane, in a photograph that had been taken long before tonight, long before the arrest. In a restaurant Mara didn't recognize at a table with Marcus Greer and Nathan Cole, looking like 3 people who were comfortable together, like 3 people who had been meeting this way for a long time. She held the phone out. Luca took it. He looked at it for 5 seconds. Then he looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at it for 3 seconds. Her face did something complicated and then resolved into something harder. Cole Greer and Juliet, she said, together. That's not Romano's operation. No, Luca said. It's not. He set the phone on the table and looked at it. Romano didn't build tonight. Romano was being managed. Someone built a container for him, fed him the Vitelli connection, fed him the Juliet relationship, gave him the tools and the timeline, and let him believe he was the one running the play. He paused. Romano is the distraction. Danny leaned forward. Then who's been running it? Cole, Reyes said, with the flatness of absolute certainty. Cole Greer and Juliet, 3 people with 3 different kinds of access, federal, financial, personal. Between them, they had everything they needed to run both sides of tonight simultaneously. Romano thinks he's taking down Moretti's empire. The federal team thinks they're arresting a Mafia boss. And the actual outcome, she stopped. Is the Romano documentation landing with me? Luca said quietly. While the evidence of Cole and Greer's involvement disappears into a federal investigation that Cole has been steering for 4 years. He looked at the drive. They wanted me to have this. They wanted me to use it. Because when I use it against Romano, though I'm doing their cleanup for them, and if anything goes wrong, the documentation ties directly back to me. The room was silent. Then Mara said, "Who sent the photograph?" Everyone looked at her. She said it again. The photograph, unknown number. Someone sent it to me specifically right now when the 4 of us are in this room. Someone who knows what we're discussing. Someone who wants us to see Cole Greer and Juliet together. She looked around the table. That's not Cole covering himself. That's someone else. Someone who has been watching Cole the way Cole has been watching us. Danny's head came up slowly. Reyes, he said, when Cole brought you the initial package 18 months ago, did he come alone? Reyes looked at him. He came alone. He said he'd been approached by a source who couldn't make direct contact, someone inside the Romano operation who wanted out but couldn't risk being identified. She paused. He said the source was terrified, that they'd been inside Romano's organization for a long time and had documentation but no safe way to move it. Did you ever meet the source? Cole said the source wasn't willing to meet. Did you ever verify the source existed? Silence. Real silence, the kind that had weight. I verified the documentation, Reyes said. Quietly. But not the source, Mara said. No. Luca picked up the phone again. He looked at the photograph. He looked at it with a different quality of attention than before, not reading it, but reading around it. The way the shot was framed, the angle, the distance. This was taken from inside the restaurant, he said. The angle is at table height, someone sitting nearby. He looked at Mara. Someone invisible. Something cold and clarifying moved through her. A waitress, she said. No one spoke. Cole's operation has a leak, she said. Someone inside it who has been watching it from the beginning, who has been feeding documentation to Reyes's operation through Cole so Cole could control the delivery, but who has also been keeping their own record, their own evidence. She looked at Luca. The photograph came to me because whoever took it needs someone outside Cole's reach to have it. They need it to survive tonight regardless of what Cole does next. She paused. They're doing what I did, using the invisible person in the room. Luca looked at her steadily. Can you reply to the number? I can try. She typed, who are you? She sent it. The response came in 11 seconds. Not words. A name. One name. And below it, an address and a time 90 minutes from now. She showed the screen to Luca. He read the name. Something moved through his eyes, deep, quick, tightly controlled. He looked at Reyes, showed her. She read it and her jaw set. That's not possible, Reyes said. The second time someone had said those words tonight. The second time the voice had said it, while the face said the opposite. Why bye? Mara asked. Reyes looked at her because that person has been dead for 2 years. Danny made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a breath. He stood up from the chair slowly, the way you stand up when the floor has shifted and you're checking whether it'll hold. Reyes, he said carefully. The source. The one who wouldn't meet. The one Cole said was inside Romano's organization. Reyes looked at him. Did Cole ever tell you why the source wouldn't meet? Danny asked. Specifically, what reason did he give? Reyes' voice when it came was very controlled. He said the source was afraid of being identified, that they'd fake their own death to get clear of Romano, that meeting in person would be too dangerous. She stopped. He said the source was a woman. The room was completely still. Mara looked at the name on her phone. One name, a woman's name. Someone who had been inside Romano's organization, who had faked her own death to escape it, who had built 2 years of documentation from the inside while Cole used her existence as the foundation for an operation he then bent toward his own ends. Someone who had been watching Cole steer the case away from himself for 18 months, building her own record, waiting for a moment when she could put that record in hands that Cole couldn't reach. She'd chosen Mara's hands. Because Mara had come in tonight from outside. Because Mara had no established position on any of the boards that had been in play. Because Mara was the only person in this story who had arrived by choice rather than by placement. We need to go, Mara said. She stood. She picked up her phone. 90 minutes. We can make it if we leave now. We don't know what we're walking into, Reyes said. We don't know what we're walking into here either. Mara looked at her. And here Cole has had time to find us. Wherever she wants us to meet, Cole doesn't know about it. Because if Cole knew she was alive, he wouldn't have spent 18 months using her as a ghost source. He'd have made sure she stayed a ghost. She looked at Luca. She's the one piece of tonight that nobody planned for, including us. Luca stood. He picked up the laptop, removed the drive, pocketed both. He crossed to the landline and pulled the cord from the wall without explaining. He looked at Reyes. You're coming. I'm aware, she said. Danny, Luca looked at her brother. You stay here. The address is, I'm not staying here, Danny said. Danny, Mara started. I have been doing what other people told me to do for 14 months. He looked at his sister with a steadiness she hadn't seen on his face in years. Not the performed steadiness of someone pretending to be okay, the real kind. I'm done with that. I'm coming. A pause. Besides, I know what Caruso owes Romano, and I know where Caruso's books are, physically on paper in a location that nobody in this room knows about except me. He held Mara's gaze. Something tells me that is going to matter in the next 90 minutes. Mara looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the brother she'd spent years worrying about and occasionally resenting and never once stopped loving, and she thought about all the things she had to say to him, the anger, the hurt, the complicated relief of him being here and upright and looking at her like himself again. Fine, she said. You're coming. She turned to the door. She put her hand on the frame and stopped for exactly 1 second without turning around. Luca. She said it to the door. The woman in the photograph, the name on my phone. She paused. Do you know her? A silence, shorter than the others tonight, more loaded. Yes, he said. She nodded once. She opened the door. She walked out, and behind her, she heard 4 sets of footsteps follow, and somewhere in the city, 90 minutes away, in a room that existed entirely outside anyone's plan, a dead woman was waiting to tell the truth. The drive took 83 minutes. Luca pushed the speed where he could and didn't where he couldn't, and nobody talked much. Which was fine because the silence in the car had shifted from the tense operational silence of the earlier hours into something that had more room in it. Not comfort, nothing about tonight qualified as comfortable, but the specific quiet of 4 people who had been through enough together in a single night to have stopped performing composure for each other. They were just tired. They were just moving towards something. They were just trying to get there in time. Mara watched the city give way to its edges and kept turning the name on her phone over in her mind. One name, a dead woman. Someone who had been inside Romano's organization long enough to build 2 years of documentation, who had trusted Nathan Cole to carry it out, and then watched Cole redirect it, who had spent 18 months invisible and patient in building a second record that nobody knew about, while the first one was being used against its own purpose. Someone who had looked at the architecture of tonight, the trap, inside the trap, and decided that the only move left was to find a person who existed entirely outside it. She had found Mara, which meant that she had been watching Vesper House. She had been watching Mara. She had known who Mara was before tonight, which meant she had known about Danny's placement, which meant she had a picture of the operation that went deeper than Reyes's and wider than Luca's, and had somehow remained invisible to Cole for 2 years. That was either the most impressive thing Mara had ever heard of, or it was something else entirely. She hadn't decided which. You knew her, Mara said. She wasn't looking at Luca. She was looking at the road. The woman before she disappeared. Yes, he said. How? A pause, not evasive, thoughtful, like he was deciding not what to say but how much of the truth required right now. She worked for Romano for 6 years. She was his financial architect, the person who built the laundering infrastructure, the account structures, the shell company network. She was extraordinary at it. He was quiet for a moment. And then 2 years ago, she vanished. Romano told his people she'd been caught skimming, that he'd dealt with it. A pause. I never fully believed that story. Why not? Because Romano deals with people who skim by making a public example of them. It keeps the others honest. But with her, nothing. No example. Just gone. He glanced at the road. The story was too clean, and she was too smart to skim from Romano. She was too smart to get caught, Reyes said from the back seat, and something in her voice had changed a degree of warmth that hadn't been there before, reluctant and real. I've been looking at her documentation for 18 months, and I still don't fully understand how she built it from inside. The access she would have needed, the exposure she was accepting. She stopped. She was running a significant risk for a very long time. She was building her exit, Danny said. You build an exit the same way you build anything. You do the work before you need it. Nobody argued with that. Luca pulled off the main road onto a smaller one, and then off that onto something that barely qualified as a road at all, and then he stopped the car. He looked at his phone, the one Reyes had given him at the car station, the one that wasn't tied to anything Batelli knew. He looked at the address Mara had shown him. He looked at the building ahead of them. She's inside, he said. How do you know? Because there's a light on the second floor, and there wasn't one when we pulled up. He got out of the car. She saw us arrive. They went in through a ground floor entrance that was unlocked deliberately recently, the kind of unlock that meant someone had just made it that way. The staircase inside was dark, and they climbed it in single file without speaking the sounds of the building settling around them. At the top, a door with a thin line of light underneath it. Luca knocked. 3 times. Then once more. The door opened. She was older than Mara had constructed from the name alone. Late 40s, maybe 50, with a face that had been through something significant and had reorganized itself around the experience into something quieter and more permanent than beauty. She was wearing dark clothes and her hair was pulled back, and she was looking at all 4 of them with eyes that were doing a very fast, very thorough calculation. Then she looked at Luca, and something happened in her expression that was small and real and completely unguarded, and she said, "You're alive." "You seem surprised," he said. "You're the one who sent the note." "I sent a woman who works in a restaurant," she said. "I didn't know if she'd do it." "I did it," Mara said. The woman's eyes moved to her. Obviously. And the woman, her name was Sophia Reyes, and she was Elena Reyes' younger sister, which was the thing that landed on the room like a change in atmospheric pressure. Quite in total, looked at Mara with an expression that crossed recognition and relief, and something that might have been gratitude before it became something more controlled. "Come inside." They went inside. Elena Reyes had not moved from the doorway. She stood in it while the others filed past her, and she looked at her sister dead for 2 years, standing in a lit room, and her face did something that Mara looked away from because some expressions belonged only to the person having them. "You could have told me," Elena said. "No," Sophia said. "I couldn't, not without Cole finding out. You trusted Cole. I couldn't tell you without Cole knowing I was alive. She said it gently, the gentleness of someone who has had a long time to make peace with a decision and still understands how it felt to the people it affected. I'm sorry, Elena. Just the name, just the two syllables of it with everything underneath them. I am genuinely sorry. Elena walked into the room and sat down at the table and put her hands flat on the surface the way Mara had done hours ago in the car, and she looked at them and she said nothing else. Sophia put a folder on the table. Thick, physical, actual paper, which in this context was a statement about security as much as anything else. 18 months of Cole, she said. Not Romano's operation, Cole's operation. His accounts, his communications, his relationship with Greer, his relationship with Juliet Crane, which predates her involvement with Luca by 2 years. She looked at Luca directly. She wasn't Romano's plant. She was Cole's. Cole placed her with you specifically. He spent 2 years building Juliet into your life. The room absorbed that. Luca sat down slowly. Not in shock, Luca Mara had come to understand did not do shock in the conventional sense. He processed, he integrated, he adjusted the picture, and kept moving. But this was a weight she could see him taking on and organizing the specific gravity of learning that someone had been in his home, in his bed, in the daily texture of his life, not because Romano had put her there, but because a federal agent with a private agenda had built her there deliberately over years. Why, he asked. Quiet, flat. The word carried an enormous amount. Because you have something Cole wants and has never been able to get through any other method. Sophia opened the folder to a specific page and turned it toward him. The Moretti Network. Not Romano's operation, not the laundering infrastructure, your network. The one your father built and you maintained, and that runs through 14 cities and has never been fully mapped by any federal investigation. She held his gaze. Cole doesn't work for the government anymore. Not really. He works for a private intelligence group that sells network maps to the highest bidder. Your father's network is worth conservatively more than everything in this room combined. She paused. Cole needed Juliet inside long enough to build a complete picture. He needed Vitelli compromised to explain away any gaps. And he needed Romano to run the distraction while the real extraction happened. Juliet, Luca said. Where is she now? Federal holding, but Greer's her handler, and Greer will move to have her released within the next 12 hours on whatever grounds are available. Once she's out, Sophia stopped. She runs, Danny said. She runs and takes everything she's built for Cole with her. Sophia looked at Luca. Unless? Unless what? Unless the arrest doesn't hold because the federal case collapses. Unless it collapses because Greer's involvement becomes known before he can manage the narrative. Unless Greer's involvement becomes known because someone with standing delivers the evidence to the right prosecutor tonight before morning, before Greer has time to make calls. She looked at the folder. Someone like Elena. Elena, who had been sitting with her hands on the table, looked up. She looked at her sister for a long moment. Something moved between them that had years of weight behind it, the weight of a faked death and 18 months of silence, and a choice made alone that had affected both of them profoundly and could not be undone by an apology, however sincere. Elena looked at the folder. She looked at what was in it. If I take this to the prosecutor, she said carefully, and the Greer case moves tonight, Cole knows it came from my operation. He knows I have a source he didn't know about. She paused. He'll run. Yes, Sophia said. And if he runs, then he runs with an incomplete picture of Luca's network because Juliet never finished building it, and without Greer to manage the federal exposure, and without Romano as his operational cover, because Romano's documentation, she looked at the drive in Luca's pocket, goes somewhere useful. She paused. He runs, and he's running damaged, and he's running into a world where he no longer has federal cover, and a man like Luca has a very long operational reach. Luca said nothing. That's not a legal resolution, Reyes said. No, Sophia agreed. It's not. I can't endorse. I know. Sophia held her sister's gaze. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to take the folder to the prosecutor and do the part of this that you can do. What happens after that is not your operation. She paused. It never was. The room went quiet. Mara looked at Luca. He was looking at the table, at the folder, at his own hands, which were resting very still on his knees. She thought about what it was to learn that the shape of the last 2 years of your life had been drawn by someone else, that the person you'd planned to marry had been placed at your table like a piece on a board, that the warmth you'd felt, or whatever version of warmth existed in a life like his, had been engineered by a man in a federal building who was selling maps to people who paid for them. She thought about what that did to a person, whether it closed something off permanently, or whether it just hurt the way ordinary betrayal hurt the way it hurt everyone. Powerful or not, dangerous or not, because that was the one thing that equalized people across every other difference, the capacity to be hurt by the people they had trusted. Luca, she said, just his name. The way you said someone's name when you wanted them to know you were actually talking to them and not past them. He looked at her. Danny said these people pay debts. She held his gaze. What do you need? Something shifted in his expression. Not the operational shift she'd been watching all night, the recalibration, the adjustment, the computation. Something different. Something that existed below the level where tonight's machinery had been running. Cole needs to not be able to finish what he started, he said. Juliet needs to not be able to run. And Romano will spend the next 6 months dealing with the documentation on that drive. By the time he surfaces with anything operational, the environment will have changed significantly. He said it with the certainty of a man speaking about something he knew how to do. Romano is manageable. Okay, she stood up. Then let's manage it. Reyes had already picked up the folder. She was on her phone, stepping toward the far end of the room, speaking in the quiet, clipped tone of someone contacting a person who needed to be reached, regardless of the hour. Sophia watched her with the expression of someone observing a consequence they set in motion and cannot fully predict. Danny stood and moved to the window and looked out at nothing visible, and Mara could see in his shoulders the specific release of a person who has been running on fear adrenaline for a very long time and is just now beginning to believe it might be almost over. Mara's phone buzzed when she looked at it. Unknown number, but not the same unknown number as before. Different prefix. Her stomach tightened in the reflex that had developed over the course of the night, the reflex of someone who had learned that unknown numbers carried operational weight. She opened the text. A single line. No name. No address. Just, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I believed it was real. Mara stared at the screen. She read it again. A third time. She knew without any analytical process exactly who had sent it. She knew it the way you knew certain things, not from reasoning, but from the accumulated weight of everything you'd learned pointing in a single direction. Juliet Crane, from Federal Holding. Somehow, through whatever thread of access Greer hadn't managed to cut yet. One more message. One last thing. Mara looked at Luca. He was watching her face, reading something on it that her face was apparently communicating without her permission. What? He said. She handed him the phone. He read it. He read it twice. His expression did not collapse or break or fracture in any of the ways that would have been understandable. It did something more complicated and harder to watch. It went very, very still in the way that meant something was being felt rather than processed, something that didn't have a strategic response and therefore had to simply be absorbed. He handed the phone back. He said nothing for a moment. Then it doesn't matter. Luca. Whether she believed it or not. He held Mara's gaze. Whether Cole convinced her it was real, whether she built something genuine on a foundation he constructed, whether she is sorry, he stopped. It doesn't change what it was, and it doesn't change what comes next. He paused. But I'll hear it later, when there's time. Something in his voice dropped a register. She doesn't run. That's all that matters tonight. Reyes came back across the room. The prosecutor is awake and listening. He needs 30 minutes with the documentation and a secure line. He's prepared to move on Greer before morning if what's in here is what Sophia says it is. She looked at her sister. Is it? Every word, Sophia said. Then I need to go. She looked at Luca. The Romano drive. I need a copy. Clean, verifiable, with chain of custody I can explain. Luca removed the drive from his pocket. He held it for one moment, long enough that it was a decision, not a reflex. Then he handed it to her. The copy goes to the prosecutor under your name only, not mine. Agreed. And Reyes. He held her gaze. Your sister goes somewhere safe tonight. Not your safe house. not anywhere Cole has mapped. Elena looked at Sophia, another one of those long, complicated looks between them that had years in it. I know where, she said. She picked up the folder. She looked at the room, at Mara, at Danny, at Luca. Something moved across her face that was the closest Elena Reyes came to unguarded. You did good work tonight, she said. To all of them, but her eyes landed last on Mara, especially you, who had no business being here. Neither did you, Mara said. Technically, you're running a private operation that you built on compromised intelligence fed through your dead sister's ghost. Nobody's work tonight holds up to close scrutiny. The corner of Reyes's mouth moved. It was the smallest possible version of a smile barely visible there and gone. No, she said. It doesn't. She picked up her coat. She looked at Sophia one more time, the look of a woman who has been given back something she had grieved and does not yet know what to do with the relief of it except hold it carefully. I'll call you. I know, Sophia said. Reyes left. Sophia followed, and they heard them on the stairs. Two sets of footsteps, different rhythms finding their way down into the dark together. Danny exhaled. It was a long, complete exhale, the kind that went all the way to the bottom. He sat back down in the chair he'd occupied earlier and put his face in his hands and stayed there for a moment, not performing anything, just being a person who had been afraid for a very long time and had arrived improbably at the other side of it. Mara watched him. She felt her own version of the same thing moving through her, not the sharp release of adrenaline, which had mostly metabolized by now, but something slower and deeper. The recognition that tonight had ended without the worst outcomes it had threatened, that her brother was alive and in this room, that the machine that had been built around them by people they hadn't known were building it had not finished grinding them through. She looked at Luca. He was standing near the window with his arms at his sides and his face in a neutral expression that she had learned over the course of approximately 4 hours was not neutral at all. It was the expression he wore when he was feeling something he'd decided not to perform. The two people you sent, she said. The Intercept. They're really safe. Yes. And Vitelli. My people will find him. He said it simply. They always do. And Cole. Cole is now a man running without Greer, without Romano, without Juliet, without a federal cover story, and with Elena Reyes' operation intact and looking directly at him. He paused. He has fewer options than he thinks he does. But he's still out there. For now. He looked at her steadily. Some things take longer than one night. She nodded. She looked at Danny, who had taken his face out of his hands and was now looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man taking inventory of everything he'd survived. Danny, Frau, she said. I know, he said to the ceiling. I haven't said anything yet. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that I put you in a restaurant without telling you why, and that I used you, and that I should have trusted you with the truth. He looked at her. And you're right. You're right about all of it. A pause. And I'm going to spend a significant amount of time making it right. Yes, she said. You are. Starting with the Caruso's books. He sat up. I wasn't joking earlier. I know where they are. Physical records going back 11 years. If Reyes' prosecutor wants them, call her in the morning. She looked at him. Tonight you're done working. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. You sound like Mom. Good. Mom had good instincts. She turned back to Luca. He was watching the exchange between them with the quiet attention of someone who understands they are adjacent to something private and is giving it its space. When he realized she was looking at him again, he said, You should sleep. We're in an empty building in the middle of the night after being shot at. Yes, and you've been running on pure adrenaline for 4 hours, which means in approximately 20 minutes, your body is going to present a bill you won't be able to negotiate. He moved away from the window. There's a room through there. It's not much, but it's clean and it's safe. How do you know it's clean and safe? You said no one knows this location. No one knows the location. I know the room. He moved toward the door, then stopped. He turned. And in the way of a man who does not make this kind of statement easily and knows it in the way of a man who has spent the entire night being precise about which truths the moment required, he said, What you did tonight mattered. Not to the operation, not to the outcome. He held her gaze. To me, specifically, personally. A pause. I wanted to say that clearly. She looked at him. She thought about all the ways to respond to that and chose the simplest true one. You would have figured it out, she said. Eventually. Maybe. The corner of his mouth moved, but not before the kitchen entrance. He paused, and the kitchen entrance was quite specifically when it mattered. He went through the door. She listened to his footsteps on the other side of it, even controlled exactly the same rhythm as they'd been all night, as if the last 4 hours had been simply another version of the thing he had always been doing, which was navigating a world that kept trying to close around him and finding the space that remained. Danny had stretched out in the chair and closed his eyes. His breathing was already evening out the way it did when he was a kid, and he'd stay up too late and crash wherever he was boneless and immediate. She watched him for a moment. Her little brother. 14 months of being afraid for him, 12 months of quiet financial drain that she'd managed without complaint, 3 years of unknowing placement in a restaurant full of dangerous people, and here he was, alive, breathing, occasionally infuriating. She would fight with him about it properly in the morning. She was looking forward to it in the specific way you looked forward to things that you'd been afraid you wouldn't get the chance to do. She sat in the other chair and closed her eyes and did not expect to sleep and was unconscious in 4 minutes. She woke to her phone. Light coming through a window she hadn't noticed the night before, early gray, the specific early morning light that arrived before color did. Her phone was buzzing with a number she recognized, this time Elena Reyes. She answered. Yes. Greer is in custody. Reyes's voice was level-awake operational. She had the voice of someone who had not slept but had done useful things instead. The prosecutor moved at 4 clean arrest, clean charge, full documentation on record. Juliet Crane's release order has been rescinded. She goes to federal arraignment this morning. A pause. Cole's accounts have been flagged by an independent financial investigator with standing. He doesn't know yet. Mara sat up. Sophia. Safe. One word. Simple. The simplest she'd heard from Reyes all night. Thank you, she added, and it was 2 words that clearly cost her something to say, which made them more valuable, not less. The call ended. Danny was awake, sitting upright, listening from across the room. He'd heard enough from her side to read the shape of it. He looked at her with a question on his face. It's done, she said, or the beginning of done. The part we needed to survive. He exhaled, nodded, said nothing because nothing was the right thing to say. Luca was already awake. She heard him on the phone in the other room speaking quietly, efficiently, in the early morning voice of a man reactivating an organization that had been in emergency suspension for one night and was now beginning to remember what it was. She didn't listen closely. That part wasn't hers. It had never been hers. What was hers was this. She had walked into a restaurant 3 years ago and become invisible, and she had used that invisibility last night to do something that mattered. And the world on the other side of it was not the same shape as the world on this side. And she was going to have to figure out what that meant slowly over time, the way you figured out most things that were actually important. She stood up. She straightened her apron. She was still wearing it, which struck her suddenly as almost funny. The apron from Vesper House, from the shift that had started like every other shift and ended like the last shift of one version of her life. She untied it. She folded it once the way she'd folded 1,000 before it. She set it on the chair. She was done being invisible. Luca came through this door and stopped when he saw her standing there without the apron, and his eyes registered. It registered what it meant, the way he registered most things quickly and completely without requiring an explanation. What happens now, she asked, not to him specifically, to the question itself. Now, he said, we find out who we are on the other side of tonight. He looked at her steadily. That takes longer than one conversation. I know, but it starts somewhere. Yes, she said, it does. She picked up her phone. She put it in her pocket. She looked at her brother, who was already standing, and Reddy, who was looking at her with the specific expression of a man who understood that the debt he owed her was not the kind that got paid in a single gesture, but the kind that got paid over time in every small decision that followed, which was the only kind that meant anything anyway. She looked at Luca, who was watching her with those quiet, watchful eyes that had been calculating the distance between where he stood and the danger that surrounded him his entire life, and who had looked at her last night and again, this morning like someone who had added a new variable to the calculation and wasn't yet sure what it changed, but knew that it changed something real. She walked to the door. 3 years ago, Mara Ellis had learned to disappear in a room full of dangerous people. Last night, she had learned something more important, that the moment you decided to be seen, truly seen on your own terms for your own reasons, regardless of what it cost, was the moment you became someone that no architecture of manipulation, however carefully built, could fully account for. She opened the door and walked out into the morning, and she did not look back because everything worth carrying was already with her.